Original Generation proved that a crossover of crossovers could work, and so the stage was set for bringing in more characters and plots into this new branch of Super Robot Wars. The mainline series continued as normal, but 3 years later Original Generation 2 was finally released for the Game Boy Advance, promising to be bigger, better, and maybe a little bit more annoying than its predecessor. Original Generation 1 ended with the success of the L5 campaign, where the insurrection of the Divine Crusaders was cancelled and the aliens, known as the Arrogators, were defeated. 6 months have passed since then, and the heroes who saved the planet have gone back to their previous lives. The Earth Federation was restructured, and its new leader made public the existence of alien forces that threatened the survival of mankind, leading to an arms race for further technological developments focused on mechanized weapons. Original Generation 2 begins with a group of soldiers being chased by the mysterious squad known as the Beowulfs. Axel, one of the commanders, sends his companions ahead and then charges into combat. Meanwhile, the ATX team has gone back to regular army work under a bunch of hardasses playing office politics. They are assigned to a battleship under the command of Captain Lee and are instructed to go clean up remnants of the Divine Crusaders. The scene shifts to a woman piloting a damaged unit who is under attack by said remnants. With no other choice, she engages them until the ATX team shows up to assist her. The woman is saved and brought aboard the battleship. She claims to be Lamia Loveless, a test pilot for Isurugi Industries, although it's all a bit suspicious, even more so due to her funny speech quirks. Still, Lamia temporarily joins the ATX team as the world begins to be thrown into chaos once again. The Divine Crusaders might have been thoroughly spanked, but not all of its members have given up. The restructuring done after the L5 campaign allowed many corrupt politicians to seize positions of power for their own benefit. So the Neo-Divine Crusaders believe that only they can protect the Earth. Normally, you'd think that they were just throwing themselves into the slaughterhouse given how poorly equipped they should be. But they aren't. Someone has been providing them with some very capable weaponry, clearly interested in seeing the world go up in flames once more. Then you have the unknown soldiers with technology that shouldn't exist, packing units that aren't supposed to be out of the prototype stage yet, as well as Gespenst Mark IIs that aren't in production anymore. And they're way more powerful than the trash cans you get to use. And of course, more aliens. Now you have a group of funny little villains hell-bent on annihilating mankind, as well as some funky plant things with gratuitously German names commanded by a little girl who speaks in riddles. The Earth is getting rammed from all directions, and the situation seems progressively more hopeless with every chapter. Yet Original Generation 2 retains the balance of serious and light-hearted moments that made its predecessor's dialogue so good. That's a very thin line to walk on, since you risk one side of the equation overwhelming the other. There can't be tension if the characters are fooling around, and there can't be laughs when you know that everyone's wondering the gap between life and death. I love how these games consistently keep that balance, which is one of the reasons why their stories, characters, and all that interpersonal drama is so enjoyable. It's cheesy, it's tropey, and sometimes it's borderline nonsense. But ultimately, it's also very endearing. It's the kind of storytelling that puts a smile on your face when you see a Saturday morning cartoon villain break the fourth wall, or watch a pair of dancing fairy robots tear a giant monstrosity to shreds. Look at them go! It's also worth mentioning that there's no protagonist selection this time around, or anyone that you could describe as the game's leading character. Instead, you have 3 points where you get to choose a route split that offers alternate stages for a bit before merging once more. The battle animations also got a substantial upgrade over its predecessor, which shouldn't be a surprise given the 3-year gap. Is it the best looking one on the system? No. Does it look awesome? Hell yes. The soundtrack though, it's a mixed bag due to changes in instrumentation. The compositions were touched up, but the instruments sound more rough and noisy. I do like how the GBA hardware gives some tracks a certain edge that works very well in some cases, which I actually prefer over the renditions in the remake. But in others, it's hard to ignore the slight downgrade in audio fidelity. Anyway, the sequel takes a stab at tackling a much more complex web of plot lines, some completely original and some adapted from other Super Robot Wars games. The stakes are higher and the highs are higher, but sometimes the lows are also lower. Again, thanks to that fine balance that the script maintains, the moment-to-moment dialogue is generally pleasing, but maybe due to the story trying to juggle so much at the same time, there are elements that I find aren't executed all that well. Let's break it down. Skip to the timestamp on screen if you don't want spoilers. First, the Divine Crusaders. Or what's left of them. They got their asses whipped last time, but have come back to fight the good guys, since apparently they think that the L5 campaign was just a fluke. Surely it wasn't because they have an army of robots with giant swords that split battleships in half and cannons that fire literal black holes. The remnants that still haven't learned their lesson are gathering under the leadership of Colonel Van Vat Tran, who was mentioned and showed up a grand total of 0 times in the first game, but totally was present in it. Don't worry, the retcons will fix it. Unfortunately for the Earth Federation, the Neo-Divine Crusaders have somehow managed to amass a powerful army thanks to the unknown soldiers from the intro, who have teamed up with them to advance their own goals. And their efforts would have gone well had they not teamed up with a bunch of bloodthirsty murderers and warhawks. Eliminated. Colonel Van is said to be a great charismatic leader, but he kind of comes off as an idiot for allowing psychopaths like Archibald in his army. Like, bro, how do you look at the way this guy acts and speaks and not immediately see red flags all over? Honestly, the totality of the personalities involved in the Neo-DC hurts any potential sympathy the player might have for them. There are good people there, like the Colonel and Yuki and Carla, but because the vile assholes are placed front and center, and because the reasons for joining the Neo-DC are barely touched on, it's difficult to not just look at them like a troop of oblivious morons. Oh, and Van decides to kill himself in a pointless suicide attack because... Next up on the hit list is The School, which was very briefly referenced in the first game as a department of the Crusaders that practiced some very questionable experiments. They had several classes of kids who were subjected to brainwashing, drugs, and extremely unsafe training so that Darwin's Law could pick the best soldiers for them. Until now, Vatuni was the only known survivor, but things get complicated when a new unit is promptly hijacked by the Neo-DC. The hijacker is none other than Seowa, one of Vatuni's friends from the school. Seowa's partner, Arado, is also alive, and so is Oka, who served as a big sister of sorts to the school's children. These three have been repeatedly brainwashed into following the wishes of their mother, treating the revival of the Divine Crusaders as their life's purpose. Thankfully, Arado is too dumb to be brainwashed, and always finds their situation rather sus. He's there because he wants to protect those he cares about, not because of the DC or whatever. God bless him. Arado is one of my favorite characters, because whenever he gets screen time, I know that I'm going to crack a smile at his silly antics. He's the traditional archetype whose hidden potential shines through at the most drastic moments. He might be a dingus, but he's got the passion to make up for it. He also goes through a predictable but satisfyingly cheesy character arc after getting shot down by the player early on and taken as a prisoner. Of course, we're the good guys, so we aren't going to force him to do anything. Instead, he decides to fight by his own will and joins the party. Sadly, my goodwill for the school kids is eroded by the dialogue repeating the same beats over and over, and you can think of Seowa as a particularly stubborn wall with big bouncy spikes on it. The remaining school members assume that Arado died, so they get reconditioned into thinking he's their sworn enemy, resulting in every interaction being summed up as "You're being brainwashed! No, you are being brainwashed! But come on, you're being brainwashed! No, you're the one being brainwashed!" Until the last stretch, this whole thing gets drawn out harder than a credit card. Anyway, Oka regains her sanity for a short moment and shoots Grandma Ugly in the face before being inflicted with symptoms of acute dying, which ends the school for good. Eliminated. There's also the Machine Children plot, which involves Arado's DNA being used to create a new perfected human race or something? Doesn't matter, they die as quickly as they appear, and this subplot isn't fully explored until the PS3 game. So, the cartoon villains. Fun little group of misfits, always bickering with one another. The Four Stooges get constant bantering with the good guys, and it's fun to watch the lady get riled up for being called a hag, or to argue between themselves about who the leader is. Oh, and I can't forget that brilliant moment when there's a title card and one of them asks what does episode 30 mean. They call themselves the Inspectors, and that's a very fitting name since their job is to regulate the technological development of different civilizations, and to make sure they never become a threat by either bringing them under their control or by destroying them completely. Naturally, they go with the latter. Their actual leader, with that very punchable face, explains that they have been observing the Earth for a long while, and have intervened behind the scenes to adjust mankind's progress or to guide it towards the right direction. But because the human race is constantly fighting among each other and is building technology to explore the universe, they have become too dangerous. Even more so thanks to mankind being extremely proficient at developing weaponry despite still being an immature civilization. However, in their stuck-up attitude of superiority, they made the critical mistake of not realizing that human emotions make them really damn stubborn in the face of adversity. Eliminated. Though it's a bit strange how the remake and the anime paints them as the big deal of the plot, even though the spotlight would be better placed on the remaining two factions. Speaking of which, the most interesting faction is the Shadow Mirrors, which come from a parallel world where history didn't quite happen the same way. Some people were different, some died while others lived, and technological advancement progressed at a different rate. This setup is used to pull some red herrings, the main one being Wodan Ymir. This mysterious character sounds and speaks like Sanger, who joined the Divine Crusaders in the first game before defecting to the player's side. Though I think this works a whole lot better when you have voice acting and large portraits to drive home the similarities between Wodan and Sanger. The leader of the Shadow Mirrors is Findel Mauser, and his shtick is that mankind has to be in a constant state of conflict so that technology continues progressing at a fast pace. He's not wrong. If it wasn't for the constant threats to mankind seen in both games, the development of such powerful weaponry wouldn't have occurred at the speed it did, and the Arrogators might have never been defeated. This is what happened to his world. It was taken over by the Einst because mankind didn't have the weaponry to defend themselves, and the Earth Federation rules over what remains with an iron fist. This is further detailed in the remake, which explicitly shows an Einst version of Kyosuke leading the Beowulfs, a task force of the Federation. And don't get me started on the anime. Vindel is also after Gilliam, or Helios Olympus, as he calls himself due to the events of a whole damn lot of other games. Hey, remember that time Gespenst played dodgeball with sentient Gundams? Whichever the case, Vindel needs him to charge up the System XN so that they can get back to their own world now that they've recovered and built up another army. Too bad he's up against a ragtag group of people who shut him down with the cheesiest possible words. Bonus points for a certain Churk proving himself to be the biggest dumbass in the entire game by ramming his battleship into another battleship that has a giant goddamn drill mounted on its front. Eliminated. The Shadow Mirrors also employ the W numbers, a group of cyborgs which were created by Lemon Browning as the perfect soldiers. Lamia is W17, the latest in the series before mass production. She starts with the mentality of following orders no matter what, because she's a soldier who exists to serve as a weapon for her masters. But as she spends time with the good guys and gets influenced by their silly antics, completely opposite to Lamia's expectations, she begins to show hints of rebellion, even though this isn't actually part of her programming. There's a hint of irony in how Lemon chooses to continue her war to the bitter end, while an artificial life form like Lamia chooses for herself. Despite following Findel to the grave, Lemon's greatest satisfaction was ultimately seeing her creation achieve sentience and transcend the line between man and machine. We also have to talk about the dynamic between Axel and Lamia, who are originally the two playable protagonists from Super Robot Wars A and its remake, A Portable. If you pick Axel as the protagonist, he loses his memory at the start, turning him into a bit of a goofball. However, Original Generation 2 follows Lamia's route, in which she infiltrates the player's side and Axel never loses his memory. Fair enough. But I think you can imagine how fans of Axel must have felt when this game ignored everything he was in A and turned him into a cringy sociopath that dies like a bitch, instead of just being the cool but mildly dickish hot-blooded pilot he was as an enemy. Incidentally, there's a ROM hack that recreates Axel's route instead. But regardless, the PS2 remake deals with his character in a much more satisfying way, making him a more likable antagonist. The retcons will fix it. Last but not least is the Einst, whose true purpose is only revealed at the very end. Throughout the game, Kyosuke and Exelon are pestered by Alphimi, a strange girl who commands the Einst and speaks in cryptic nonsense about the land of beginnings and a door that must be opened. The context is that Kyosuke and Exelon were involved in an accident, where the shuttle that they were in crashed after an Einst smacked into it. Kyosuke survived through sheer luck and plot armor, but Exelon was already fatally injured. However, the Einst implanted her with some of their organic matter and she survived. In other words, Exelon is actually a half-human, half-Einst hybrid, while Alphimi is some sort of clone based on the knowledge they obtained during that accident. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to dock some points for more brainwashing. Because Exelon is half tentacle plant girl, she gets mind controlled somehow and spends a few chapters as an enemy, which is a complete retread of what happened in Kyosuke's route back in the first game. And sure, Ryusei's route is the canonical one, but this still feels like a cheap attempt at drama and reduces one of the most entertaining characters into a brick of nothing. Anyway, after smacking Findo in the face, he tries to force the System XN to activate, but Gilliam and Lamia intervene and try to use it to teleport the three of them beyond the known universe. This somehow grants Alphimi enough energy to open the door she rambles about. As a result, the System XN ends up transporting the party into the Einst world, which is now connected to the human world so they can start spreading their slimy little appendages into it. The Grand Leader of the Einst claims that humans didn't evolve in the way it wanted them to, so it decides to clean house and start over by creating a new, perfect life form under its guidance, using Exelon as a base. But of course, the Cheese Squad is here to fight back with willpower, heroism, and big friggin' cannons. Eliminated. It also ends with everyone realizing how ironic it is that the Regisaur's plan was doomed from the start, because despite having lived for so long, it still missed an obvious detail. Creating new life requires a man and a woman, so taking only Exelon was a big oof. They got an Eve, but they forgot to get an Adam. Rookie mistake. Everyone loves a cute anime girl with a sadistic streak, so Alphimi is also welcomed into the party at the very end after realizing that she can be her own person rather than the Regisaur's puppet. Unfortunately, because Alphimi still runs on Einst juice, I suppose, her unit starts falling apart and she can survive without it. But like Lamia, she managed to break free and make her own choices. Don't worry, the retcons will fix it. In terms of core gameplay, the changes from its predecessor aren't too dramatic. Original Generation 2 merely expands on the established formula. It's a turn-based strategy game, where the player and the AI take turns at smacking each other. Sometimes you just have to destroy every enemy, sometimes you have a time limit, and sometimes you have to protect some area or some unit. During stages, you control your units one by one, moving them through the terrain and attacking enemies. The maps are quite simple and you don't have to worry about facing the right direction or attacking from behind. Hitting and shooting down enemies or dodging attacks progressively raises a pilot's will, which typically starts at 100 and goes up to a maximum of 150. The higher the pilot's will, the more overall damage they inflict, and it also activates certain skills and enables the usage of more powerful attacks. Every pilot also learns a fixed set of 6 spirits, which temporarily provide various bonuses and are indispensable for your success. The challenge is in managing SP, which is required to cast spirits and does not recover during stages unless the pilot has the SP regen skill, so don't waste it all at once. Between stages, you have an intermission screen to manage your team. Destroying enemies earns money to upgrade your units and pilot points to power up your characters. Every unit has a number of base stats that can be upgraded up to a certain degree, as well as a limited number of slots to equip option parts. Many units can also equip general use weapons on top of their built-in ones, and all of them can be upgraded to increase their base power. Pilots can spend pilot points to raise their base stats, learn new skills, or raise their terrain rankings, which are combined with the unit's own rankings to calculate its effectiveness on different terrain types. Of note is the addition of full upgrade bonuses, which are awarded when you fully upgrade a unit, and unique ace bonuses for pilots that shoot down a total of 50 enemies. OG2 introduces chain attacks, which allow specific weapons to hit multiple enemies in a straight line, and the support system was split into support attack and support defense, each requiring pilots to learn its own skill. If you've played its predecessor, Original Generation 2's mechanics should feel very familiar. What separates the two is actually the way in which they are balanced. It's a much more aggressive game, where offense is highly incentivized. Holding back will lead to you missing out on battle masteries or secrets, and damage values are much higher all around. Your tanks will fold like a sheet of paper against bosses, but you also have access to more powerful weapons, with combination attacks being particularly essential. Getting the SP regen skill for all of your pilots is practically required if you want to not have an awful time. Certain enemies are insanely dodgy due to their high stats, and this game also gives out S ranks like candy, which grants a massive 30% bonus to accuracy and evasion when going from A to S. All this to say that this game does not dick around. It will take your sausage and snap it to pieces unless you know what you're doing. And not always in a good way. Original Generation 2 frequently straddles the line between challenge and frustration, and at times it crosses that line at supersonic speeds. On one hand, the difficulty plays into the story perfectly. It's very cool how the game pulls off the dynamic of the heroes getting smacked around during the first half, but rising back up during the second part, thanks to enemies actually being dangerous. Your team feels weak and underpowered early on due to the high damage values, generally high evasion and accuracy of certain enemies, and a selection of units that range from good to really bad. You'll be on the edge every time a boss unit targets a member of your team, knowing that even your tanky units can only survive 1, maybe 2 hits before railing into the danger zone. But just like the story presents it, slowly and surely your team gathers more and more powerful units and the tide starts turning in the player's favor, with the increased damage values becoming your best friend as you dish out 5-digit slappings every turn. Moving from being outplayed at every corner to watching the villains squirm after realizing that they no longer hold the upper hand is truly empowering. On the other hand, the difficulty is very volatile during the early and mid-game, sometimes veering too much into the wrong side of challenge due to certain enemies having overtuned stats. You can go from cruising along in one stage to having trouble in the next. For example, the Einst are piss easy to deal with, while the Bioroids have ridiculous evasion stats and ride units with ridiculous mobility stats and S ranks. This could have been alleviated if certain units returned from the first game. But nope, enjoy your mass-produced trash cans and a fighter jet that doesn't even have a cheap post-move attack like the one from the first game. Yes, that is foreshadowing. Again, the game strongly incentivizes upgrading terrain ranks, and especially acquiring the SP regen skill as soon as possible, because certain types of enemies have such high stats that focus and strike are essential. It's silly how the challenge with certain bosses is to simply have enough SP to even be able to hit them and break through the HP they regenerate every turn, while others without ridiculous evasion stats are really just a battle of attrition. I'm not arguing that it's badly designed, since the game does give you the tools to overcome its challenges. But I am arguing that it's a restrictive kind of design that discourages experimentation in a game with so many options to play with, and it railroads the player into doing the exact same thing every time. It's a game with a correct way to play it and a wrong way to play it. It's hilarious how the difficulty takes a nosedive when you finally get the resources to buy SP regen and upgrade your terrain rankings, which is likely one of the reasons why the series added upgradable accuracy as a stat. Also, can I just rant about how utterly fun-hating some secrets are in this game? You've got nonsense like defeating an enemy and then moving a character to the exact spot where that enemy was, even though the game doesn't give any confirmation and just barely implies you need to do this. Or how about this stage where you have 4 weak units and have to spend an hour slowly abusing quick saves to defeat all 3 endgame bosses in the right order? Oh, and this awesome new unit that has been hinted at for so long? Don't let it kill any enemies if you want a secret. Why? Some battle masteries even straight up require safe scumming or trial and error, rather than, you know, actually mastering your battle skills? But then again, you don't need to deal with this sigh bastard of a game anymore. Original Generation 1 and 2 were remade into a single package released back in 2007, aptly named Original Generations. In plural, and it's friggin' awesome, so load up your Sony Windows Station 2 and let's eat good! For starters, you get a few completely new stages at the start, which take place in the Shadow Mirror world and introduces the characters from Super Robot Wars R. The twins, Raul and Fiona, take center stage in the Excellence units, which run on a fancy engine that transforms chronoparticles into energy. The group is on its way to the Tesla Reich labs when they're attacked by unknown soldiers, and an encounter with Axel's squad is cut short when a mysterious entity interferes and causes Fiona's time flow engine to go bonkers. Axel attacks Raoul, but his sister covers for him and presumably dies in the explosion while the others disappear without a trace. After that, you also get to control Axel for a couple of minutes, telling you right away that the remake is going to handle his character differently. Meanwhile, the ATX team is busy dealing with a group of DC remnants who enact a hostage situation and try to steal a special unit. The hostages are saved, but the punks escape with the unit in the end. You should probably not think too much about these though, because they're mostly just setups for the follow-up. The Excellence crew joins in the last quarter, but the funny monocle guy only has like 2 minutes of screen time after the prologue. From there, it returns to the source material, with Lamia appearing and joining the ATX team. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other meaningful changes in the new script. Original Generations does many small tweaks and additions that really add up, with new dialogue that elaborates on certain details and a handful of entirely new stages. As a result, the remake is a decent chunk longer than its GBA counterpart. But it's also far easier, in a good way. The quality of life improvements like selecting multiple spirits at a time are great, but the big changes come from the tools available to the player. It's not that enemies have gotten stronger or weaker, but rather that the player is better equipped to deal with them. Since both titles are packed into a single game, you get a carryover bonus with enough money to fully upgrade a couple of weapons, meaning that you have a realistic chance at taking down early game bosses without them retreating. And although stat point increases have more than doubled in price and S-Terrain rankings now cost 60 instead of 40, overall PP costs for important skills like SP regen have been reduced. Several units that didn't return for OG2 are also present here, so you're not stuck throwing characters into the leftovers. There's even a few completely new ones, and by the halfway point you instead have the enviable problem of too many cool units and not enough deployment slots. Other small alterations include being able to overwrite most default skills, a small PP bonus for achieving battle masteries, and being able to use combo moves during counterattacks and support attacks. But the real star of the show is the twin system, which lets two units join together and attack simultaneously. This lets you pile on tons of damage in a single move and indirectly makes certain battle masteries and secrets much more manageable. Depending on their class, paired units also get granted small bonuses like extra damage or extra evasion, and it unlocks each pilot's twin spirit, which expands SP from both units to trigger effects that aren't normally available otherwise. Of course, enemies also use it sometimes, so you have to choose whether to focus on one of them or split your attacks, or alternatively nuke them with an all or all W attack. That second one kind of doubles as the replacement for chain attacks, letting you hit a second adjacent pair of enemies. But while this does mean that you have to watch out for twice the attacks, the twin system is also one of the ways in which the remake is so much easier. More enemies means more doge and more PP, even more so because the sub-unit gets their share of it. So in a way, it's still a good game for submissives. Yes, it's a lot easier than the original game, and that downgrades the dynamic I talked about earlier. But frankly, any potential issues I have with it is overridden by the whole experience flowing more smoothly. And when you look at these gorgeous combat animations, I think you'll agree. Can I jerk off at how good these animations are for a moment? Like holy hell, combined with the voice acting and most characters getting their own music themes, watching these animations makes me hyped as balls. They're so consistently good, with great sound effects that nail the impact of each strike, and fantastic sprite work all around that makes even the trash cans look badass. Every new unit you acquire is like you're a little kid on Christmas Day. Man, where did it all go so wrong? Anyway, let's dive deeper into some of the notable changes to the story. Again, there will be spoilers, so here's a timestamp if you want to skip them. One of the issues with the original game is that certain characters didn't get enough development to make the player care or understand why they do the things they do. For example, the Project TD subplot has a stage where Tsugumi gets into the friggin' robot, which makes her sympathize with Ibis's struggle as a pilot when she realizes that live combat isn't as easy as Sway makes it look like. Speaking of which, Sway actually has moments where she's likable instead of a raging mad woman. Yeah, that's a thing. Original Generations broadly attempts to make the antagonists that aren't totally irredeemable be at least slightly sympathetic. Colonel Fan's role as a leader is a lot more believable now that he got some screen time in the OG1 portion, as well as more meaningful presence here. Still dies like an idiot though. And unfortunately, it is with a heavy heart that I must sadly announce that Lee survives now. The shadow mirrors got most of the attention, revealing more details of the world itself and expanding on how things worked out over there. They're also after the excellence units, since the time flow engine turns out to be capable of dimensional jumping, just like the System XN. Most of all, Axel is a considerably different character here. He is still a hot-headed pilot, but he's no longer an arrogant little baby who can't go a single minute without crying about Beowulf or the W series being puppets. He's actually likable? Axel's problem with Kyosuke is justified as being wary that he could eventually become like the Beowulf that he's familiar with. This makes extra sense when you remember that the Autisen is temporarily painted blue at the start, just like the Einst version. But the focal point of his character arc is basically the reverse of Lamia. Axel grows overly focused on the ideals and the war he fights for, to the point of obsession, resulting in some good old dramatic irony. The puppet became human, and the human became a puppet. The best way to exemplify this change is during the infiltration into the White Star, which has been taken over by the Inspectors and the Shadow Mirrors. Echidna, aka W16, is ordered by Lemon to keep Axel alive at all costs. But he then overrides that order and tells her to protect the White Star. However, just as he's about to get slammed, Echidna steps in the way and sacrifices herself to protect Axel. Not out of duty, not because he's the commander, but because his death would make Lemon sad. In the original script, Axel just gets angry at the fact that he was saved by a puppet, like his fragile pride just got shattered. In the remake, he's shocked at how a W number could have possibly disobeyed orders, admitting that she's unfit for war, and not in a disdainful manner. Being able to think for herself instead of just being a soldier who follows orders without question makes Echidna more human than he is at this point. He even respectfully calls her a fellow squad mate. Character development. It's a Christmas miracle. EXO definitely must have been a favorite, because he got some big honors over time, like when he went on a happy fun adventure with Alchemy over in the Endless Frontier world. Lemon gets more screen time as well as more interactions with Excellent and the W series, though Vindel remains the same. He's still the same warmongering dingus who wants to watch the world burn so that the robots get cooler more quickly, and that's fine. It's a simple, pragmatic concept with an understandable logic behind it that goes directly against the player character's ideals. Oh right, I guess I should talk about Original Generations 2.5, huh? Like I said, the R-cast is mostly a cocktease. They don't do much during the entirety of the OG2's story. It's more of a setup for Original Generations 2.5, which you unlock after completing the remade stories and is actually just a playable preview of Original Generations Gaiden, a sequel that came out 6 months later. There are story and gameplay changes between 2.5 and Gaiden, but you've got 12 stages here, which is about a quarter of the whole game. It begins with bringing back more obscure stuff from Banpresto's history. A young man called Kota gets involved with Fighter Roar, a powerful spirit that has been fighting evil throughout many different worlds. Thanks to him, Kota reluctantly becomes the pilot of the compatible Kaiser in order to save his town and sister. Things get complicated when his sister is kidnapped by Volca, protagonist of Compact 3 and an important member of the Shura, an empire of martial artists whose entire way of life is to throw themselves into somewhere and start fighting all over the place. And naturally, they want to turn this world into another clusterfuck. It also sets up the main plot of Super Robot Wars R, involving the mysterious entity that caused that whole thing at the start. Duminas and her trio of pipsqueaks are looking to open a door of some kind, and for that they need to steal the so-called time cog from the Excellence crew. But most importantly, 2.5 focuses on the ODE system subplot, adapted from a 3-episode OVA released back in 2005. The gist is that some dingus has revived an old project that was originally intended to minimize casualties in war by allowing a single pilot to command multiple units at once, but this has now turned into something far more sinister. The ODE system is implemented into a set of units, the Mironga and its successor, the Bartol. It's a very powerful technology, but it places so much strain on the pilot that they end up dead. And naturally, this is all backed up by shady dealings with the Earth Federation. You know, maybe the inspectors had a point? To make things worse, the perfected ODE system relies on pilots being used as living cores, so a ton of people are kidnapped for that purpose, which means more brainwashing. This time with Lamia as the main victim. She just had her story, why are you doing this? 2.5 is a thing. It exists and it's there, but it's not great. You spend most of it fighting waves of Bartols over and over, which gets old pretty quick. There's a handful of really annoying stages too, and you're expected to fight an endgame boss with mid-game resources. I mean, it's perfectly doable, but holy hell is it boring. The best part is that you can get a Mironga as a secret, and that thing is rad as hell. And I have to say, the tone feels uncharacteristically edgy at points. Like, yeah, there were a bunch of atrocities in OG 1 and 2, but the way it's presented here just seems a bit off? I don't know, maybe it's just me. Original Generation is one of those cases where the first game was a consistently fun experience, but the sequel likes bouncing up and down on the fun scale. Original Generation 1 is a flat 8 out of 10. It's not going to blow your mind, but it's a solid experience almost all the way through, while Original Generation 2 ranges between a 5 out of 10 at worst to a 9 out of 10 at best. It's frustratingly annoying at multiple points, both in gameplay and in story. But when it's on a high, it's really high. The payoff you get from finally blasting all those idiot villains to Kingdom Come after getting cock-blocked for dozens of hours is incredibly satisfying. And with the right combination of units, you can break the late game in half. That said, none of that matters as much anymore, when Original Generations is the definitive version of both games, not just from the visual and gameplay upgrades, but also from the rewritten parts of the story. It's now Original Generations Episode 1 and Episode 2, with the latter being especially improved by this remake. So if you like giant robots, turn-based strategy and want a good time, then you owe it to yourself to give Original Generations a try.